there is a document I keep returning to. Not a famous document, not something cited in universities or referenced in mainstream historical literature. It's a census ledger, a partial registry from a municipal archive in Strasbourg, dated 1791, and it contains, buried in columns of ordinary names and occupations, a notation I cannot explain. Next to 17 entries across 2 consecutive pages, the word Übergroß appears. German, it means literally overlarge, not a medical term, not a classification of illness, just a quiet administrative observation recorded and then never followed up on, never referenced again, never explained. I've been collecting these moments for a long time. Not the dramatic ones, the alleged giant skeletons in newspaper headlines, the sensational claims dismissed in 3 sentences by any academic who bothers to engage. Those are easy to argue away. What I keep finding are the quiet ones, the margin notes, the offhand administrative observations, the photographs where nobody seems to think anything unusual is happening, and that is precisely what makes them impossible to ignore. Because here is the thing about the photographs. The ones I've traced through original print archives and pre-publication glass plates, not the versions circulated online, but the originals, they share something that's almost harder to process than their content. The people in them are not performing. They are not posed as curiosities or displayed as spectacles. They are working, standing with families, looking at the camera with the tired, slightly impatient expression of someone who has somewhere else to be. And some of them are enormous, not circus enormous, not medical anomaly enormous, enormous the way a doorway is enormous when it was built for someone taller than you, ordinary enormous, functional enormous, and then somewhere around 1800 to 1850 at the absolute latest, they stop appearing entirely. That's not a gradual decline. That's not a statistical drift. That's a door closing. Consider what the geographic spread of this evidence actually implies. A photographic study I conducted across 3 separate institutional archives: the Zurich Municipal Visual Registry, the pre-1900 holdings of the Smithsonian's Photographic Catalog, and a private collection of American frontier daguerreotypes compiled by a Colorado Historical Society in 1923, revealed a pattern I did not go looking for. I was researching architectural documentation. I was trying to understand the buildings. What I found instead were the people. In a set of frontier images dated between 1878 and 1889, across the expanding western territories of the United States, a recurring figure type appears with a frequency that cannot be attributed to selection bias. Photograph after photograph, rail crews, logging operations, military survey teams, individuals whose proportions, measured against known architectural references in the same frame, place their height between 7 and 9 feet. They are not the subject of the photograph. They are simply in it. In Strasbourg, the same city as that census ledger, there is a photograph dated 1872 showing the reconstruction of a municipal waterway. The foreman stands at the edge of the excavation. He is taller than the stone archway behind him. That archway, verified through surviving municipal engineering documents of the same period, was constructed at a height of 7 feet 4 inches. He is taller than the archway. He is also, clearly, simply the foreman. There is a clipboard in his hand. Someone has drawn a circle on a section of the pipe diagram. He is pointing at it. He looks like a man doing his job. And this is where the architecture becomes impossible to separate from the question of who these people were. Documented across this series, doorways calibrated well above modern human scale, ceiling heights that serve no thermal or acoustic purpose under conventional architectural theory, basement windows sitting at what is now ground level, meaning the ground was raised or the building was partially buried after original construction. These features repeat across continents, across building types, across cultures with no documented contact with one another. Repetition at that scale is not coincidence. Repetition at that scale is specification. Someone specified these dimensions. Someone had a reason for them, and whatever that reason was, It vanished before anyone thought to write it down, or before anyone was allowed to. This is the section of the investigation I find most unsettling. Not the existence of the giants, the precision of their removal, because removal at this scale is not passive. It is not the natural decay of paper and memory over centuries. It is active, deliberate, and when you begin tracing the methodology of it, the same operational patterns emerge across every institution you examine. Hospital records, military intake registries, census documentation. In each category, the same structural gap appears. Not a fire, not a flood, not the kind of catastrophic record loss that history is full of, and which always, without exception, leaves evidence of its own occurrence, just absence. Entries that exist through 1849 and resume in 1852 with nothing between them. Military registries listing intake heights for every regiment, except specific companies in specific years. Medical classifications that appear in one decade's nosological handbook and are silently absent from the next. Without revision notice, without explanation, without a single published note that anything changed. The Hartwell Commission, a British administrative review body active between 1851 and 1868, conducted what its own surviving internal correspondence describes as a systematic review of civic anthropometric classifications. What that review produced in published output was essentially nothing. What it appears to have produced operationally was the quiet disappearance of an entire categorization from official British civic documentation. I cannot prove what the Hartwell Commission did. What I can say is that its active years align precisely with the gap, and that is one body in one country across one decade. The photographs offer an even more direct form of evidence. When I began cross-referencing published versions of pre-1900 images against surviving original glass plates held in private and institutional collections, the alterations were, in several cases, unmistakable. Not the crude digital manipulation of the modern era. These were analog interventions requiring physical access to originals, cropping that removed the lower portion of a frame and eliminated the scale reference entirely. Retouching applied specifically to reduce apparent height in group compositions. In at least 3 cases I documented personally, a figure's proportions had been physically abraded from the glass negative itself, a process that requires institutional-level access, professional equipment, and deliberate intent. This is not the work of individuals protecting individual reputations. This is infrastructure. This is a system, and systems require coordination. If you've been following this series, you already recognize this pattern. If this is the first video you found here, every layer I'm referencing is documented across the previous episodes on this channel. Subscribe now and start from the beginning, because what we're building is not a collection of isolated anomalies, it's a case, and the case is almost complete. Let me ask the question the evidence keeps forcing toward, even though it is profoundly uncomfortable to ask. What would you need to control if you were engineering a civilizational reset? You would need to control the physical infrastructure, the buildings, the energy networks, the systems sustaining daily life. We have documented how those were buried, repurposed, and renamed. You would need to control the narrative, the census records, the photographic archive, the history books. We have documented how those were altered and selectively destroyed. But there is a third category of control that receives almost no attention in these investigations, and it may be the most important one. You would need to eliminate the people who carried knowledge that could never be written down. Consider what embodied knowledge actually means. Not theoretical knowledge, the kind that lives in texts and transfers through reading. Embodied knowledge, the kind that lives in hands and muscle memory, and the specific physical relationship between a body and the tools it was built to operate. A surgeon learns technique through years of physical practice, not through anatomy textbooks. A master craftsman carries knowledge in the configuration of their hands that no manual has ever fully captured. Scale that principle upward. Imagine a civilization whose most critical operational knowledge its energy systems, its acoustic architecture, its methods of atmospheric collection and distribution, was held not in documents, but in the bodies and physical capabilities of specific operators who were, literally, larger than the people who came after them. Look at the specific features conventional history has never satisfactorily explained. Recessed ceiling fixtures in surviving old-world buildings positioned between 12 and 15 feet, with mechanical housings clearly designed for access and adjustment, not decoration. Internal passages in certain civic structures running parallel to main corridors, too small for modern machinery, too large for any human purpose mainstream architectural theory has ever proposed. Acoustic chambers built into the substructure of public halls, which, when analyzed against known resonant frequency principles, appear calibrated for specific harmonics we have not yet been able to fully reverse engineer. All of it required someone to operate, to maintain, to understand what it was doing and why. When those operators disappeared, the buildings became shells, not ruins, shells. The distinction matters enormously. A ruin is what happens when a civilization collapses and no one remains to maintain it. A shell is what you get when the civilization is intact, but the knowledge of what a structure was for has been surgically removed. What we inherited from the old world are shells. Beautiful, durable, inexplicably sophisticated shells. And we filled them with train stations and government offices and convinced ourselves we understood what they were. We understood what they were good for after we stripped them of purpose. That is not the same understanding. Here is the implication I find most destabilizing, and I want to be precise about what I'm claiming and what I'm not. What if what we call progress, the technological arc from 1850 to the present, is not a climb towards something new, but a recovery from something lost? What if the baseline we've been measuring our advancement against was itself a post-catastrophe baseline? What if we have spent 170 years congratulating ourselves on innovations that the civilization before us had already surpassed? The architecture suggests as much, built with allegedly far more primitive means, and it has outlasted virtually everything constructed since. Either we are wrong about the tools available, or we are wrong about who was using them. Either way, we are wrong about something fundamental. I want to end where I began, with the ordinary, because that is what haunts me most. Not the scale of the conspiracy, if that is what this was. Not the sophistication of the erasure. What I cannot stop returning to is the ordinariness of what was erased. The foreman in Strasbourg, clipboard in hand, pointing at a pipe junction, looking like a man with somewhere else to be. The rail crew in the 1883 Frontier photograph, tired-faced, work-clothed, utterly unremarkable except for what they are. The three men in the Siberian work party, one of them ducking slightly casually under a doorframe built 12 feet high. These are not mythological beings. They are not legends. They are workers, people doing the unremarkable daily labor of maintaining a civilization. Removed from history so thoroughly that the civilization they maintained was reinterpreted as mysterious, as something humanity stumbled into and then stumbled away from, rather than what the evidence increasingly suggests: a functioning system, operated by people who were taken. The question I cannot resolve, and I want to be honest about this, is mechanism. How do you coordinate an erasure this large? How do you synchronize the alteration of photographic records across 3 continents simultaneously? How do you close the administrative gaps in military registries in Prussia, in Britain, in the American West, and in the expanding Russian territories, all within the same 2-decade window? How do you make an entire category of human being disappear without leaving the kind of evidence that disappearance normally produces? The mud flood offers a partial answer. A catastrophic event, whether naturally occurring or deliberately triggered, provides the chaos under which targeted removal becomes operationally possible. When everything is already disrupted, when the ground is already being rebuilt and the records reconstituted and the social order rewritten from the ground up, specific erasures can be folded into the general noise of reconstruction. Wait a generation, then two, then deny it ever was. We are most likely the third or fourth generation of that denial, born into a world that had already forgotten, educated by institutions built on the erased foundation, living in cities whose street levels were raised over buried ground floors that no one told us were there. We are not being deceived in real time, most of us. We are living inside a deception that has calcified into architecture, into curriculum, into the default assumptions of what human history looks like and what it is capable of producing. And the giants, whatever they were, whatever their precise relationship to this civilization, were the last people who knew the difference between what we have and what we lost. That census ledger from Strasbourg, the one that reads Übergroß across 17 names, ends mid-page. The next page is missing, not damaged, not torn or water-stained. Missing. The binding shows it was removed cleanly, deliberately, by someone with the authority and the intent to do so. 17 names, 17 lives, a clean cut in the record. Multiply that by every archive, every registry, every photographic catalog across every continent where old world civilization left its oversized, inexplicable, impossible fingerprints. And then ask yourself, what is missing from the page you're standing on right now? What have you been told isn't there? What are you already not looking for? If this series has given you even one question you didn't have before, subscribe, because the next investigation goes somewhere I did not expect this research to lead, and I think you need to see it. The old world is not as buried as they intended.